amazing and exclusive event, the Cooks River Hatching. I would like to begin by acknowledging country, by thinking about where we're sitting. I'm sitting here far from home, far from my Wiradjuri country. I'm sitting here on the Wongal side of the river, looking out the window that's just beyond my screen here, where the sky is tinged that pale orange of this season as the days grow longer and the weather grows warmer. And you've just missed the flurry of the cockatoos fighting for a space in the angophora that's in the tree outside, which is the season that we're in on country at the moment. And I'm sure I'm not alone in moving around the river and noticing the places where you have to duck, where you get swooped. Where those birds are protecting their nests while they bring their babies out. We'll hear more of that tonight. But also in noticing the flowers that are coming on the blue flax that are going to turn into the beautiful berries. And there's a lot of bright green kangaroo apples appearing on the kangaroo apple trees, and blossoms everywhere. So it's this season of productiveness and the season of the new generations coming forth. And I'm very grateful for country for showing me this new generation and this new season. You're all along the river somewhere, on Wongal country, Gadigal country, Bedigal country, Gwegal country, and other places up in through the catchment. So I'd like to just take a moment also to think about the tracks that we all make as we follow the water down through the catchment and into the flow of the river, because it's the river that brings us all together tonight. So my old people remind me to walk with care and respect and look after country and the river. And my old people say hello to your old people who are walking with you tonight. They're all reminding us all to live our good lives and to live with care and respect for each other. It's an honour to share country with such good people and to be in such fine company tonight. But I think it's time now to move over to the main attraction and to move over to the hatching in this season of new generations. And we've got our most excellent and deadly mudlarks who are going to present for us tonight. The stories, the pictures, the legends of the Cooks River hatching. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen somehow. There we go. And hand over. I think, Jamie, you're taking the lead here. And I'll mute myself and leave it to the mudlarks.
Thank you. Peter Munro here. I'll be leading off this evening. Just following on from Jen's acknowledgement of country, I'd like to acknowledge that we're probably looking at many of the same species of birds as the traditional custodians of the land did for thousands and thousands of years. And I think we're sort of doing the same sorts of thing in those observations. We're looking for trends, we're looking for changes, we're looking for the change of, certainly the change of seasons, but possibly even bigger changes going on. And the birds that we observe probably have reflected those changes for thousands and thousands of years. And we've got lots of people that have arrived from overseas, and we've got lots of birds that have arrived from overseas. But they also add to the interest in the data that we do collect. Tonight, I'll be followed by Jennifer Kent, who's going to talk about the processes of bird identification and the various techniques that we use to identify and count. And then Doug Benson has done some great analysis of the data we've collected over the last couple of years, and he'll run through that. Interspersed all the way through will be the photographs of David Noble, and anyone who's seen those photographs would have to acknowledge that they're nothing less than outstanding. All the shots used here, apart from the first one that I'll show have all been taken by David. Excuse me. When a couple of years ago, Jennifer Kent and I had been discussing prospects of starting a birding group. We looked at what was happening in the valley. The Greenway's got their own birding group that meets regularly. The Tempe Birdos, they do an observation regularly. The Wallow Creek does. And as we'll show the maps a bit later on, what we tried to do was fill in some of the gaps of that observation. It'd be a great thing if and when, and I'm hoping it'll be when, not if, these things start collating. We collate all of that information together. It's a very difficult thing to be consistent in the approach we use in the data collection, and also to put that to good use. And Doug's been terrific in advising us and helping us be citizen scientists as much as we can. We tend to try and wander off and talk more than we should, but Doug and Jenna have been great in keeping us on track and on time. We do it at the same time every month and not spend too much time talking to each other. I must say it's a terrific experience. The knowledge and the skills of people like David Hare and Chris Mabry and David Noble are tremendous, and we learn so much. They're very willing to share their knowledge, and it's been great to spend so much time with them. So, okay, we might move on to the next slide. Just reflecting on that, when Jen and I talked about forming the group, we thought about names, and I went and looked at some of the typical names, and it's amazing. Twitchers, tweeters, screechers, hooters, carolers, whistlers, cacklers, trillers, and squeakers are just some of them. But we decided not to go down the onomatopoeic peak path, and we thought we'd honour the mud crabs and use the first half of the mud crab's name, and the Mudlarks was suggested by Jennifer, and it's been a great selection of name, particularly as we've seen mudlarks nesting and rearing their young this year, as you'll see a bit later on in the photographs. So that's been really interesting. We've been going for about, next slide, Jamie, sorry. We've been going for about almost 2 years. We've missed 1 or 2 meetings because of maybe Christmas and the COVID, but we've been pretty good. We've got 19 months of data, and it's starting to make sense now through Doug's analysis, as we'll see a bit later on. We have 2 circuits that we do. We alternate each month. Jamie might be able to point around, if you can, Jamie. This is the Boat Harbour circuit. We start at the Langway Road Bridge when it'll be open again. That's where we'll start. We go down, we head west along the river on the northern side down to Boat Harbour, through Ewan Park, Boat Harbour, cross the bridge, and we go around the Cup and Saucer Creek wetlands, and then back along the southern side of the river, back to where we started. And this is very much, it's interesting, the other route I'll explain in a moment, but this is the route that is obviously water-based. But more than that, it's the area of the mangroves, and the mangroves are really significant in terms of giving birds shelter and hiding places and nesting places. But also the mudflats are really important there. At low tide, we see a lot more wading birds, and it's been great to see nesting birds in the mangroves. That's been we're very quiet, and we've got some great observers and great hearers of sounds. We can pick up some really unusual birds in the mangroves that are just sitting there silently every now and again. Okay, the second route is the we call it the wave rock route. We start again at the same point, but this time we go east across the, I think it's east, no it's not, it's west, across the Wardell Road and down through Beeman Park, which is very open land, lots of trees, but very few small bushes and shrubs, but a really interesting area to see birds if you know where to look. Across the bridge, the footbridge near the golf clubhouse, back along through Wave Rock, and through the golf course into Dibble Avenue, which is a small waterhole that not a lot of people know about, but we have different times we've seen lots of native ducks in there. It's a bit barren at the moment, and we might go into the reason for that later on. And then back to the golf course, across Wardell Road again, around the edge of the golf course into what we call butcherbird territory, because there's one waiting for us there every month that says hello to us. And then back to our starting point, where the feature of our monthly surveys happen, and that's morning tea. Great experience, the morning tea. We spend a lot of time talking and discussing the various, some arguments about identification, because some of these birds are quite difficult to differentiate, and some funny stories that emerge from those discussions. Okay, next one, Jamie. Just some, again, David Noble's photographs, a pair of chestnut teals. This would no doubt be on the Boat Harbour circuit, because that's where we tend to see more of the ducks, both on the river and in the Cup and Saucer Creek wetlands, which is a great haven. Again, Doug will touch on this later on in his analysis. But we tend to see a lot more water birds on that circuit than we do on the other one. The interesting thing that's come up that Jennifer will touch on later on is the small birds. One thing we're noticing is the very specific location where we see small birds, and that's particularly around Ford Avenue, where there's dense bushland. There's a part of mud crabs plantings there, and that habitat's obviously providing a lot of protection for those small birds, but we don't see a lot of them in other places. Very few honeyeaters and other such small birds, but that's an interesting observation. Okay, Jamie, on to the next one. Looking at why we do it, I've touched on some of that already, but recording the number and variety of birds and how they fluctuate over time gives us valuable data. The Cooks River Alliance is currently gathering data in one part of the Coastal Catchment Management Program, and they've got a group that's collecting data on biodiversity. And the sort of information that we're collecting and the other bird groups are collecting is vital. I think we must remember to give that over to them to be able to use in their analysis of the needs of the river. But we're looking at changing weather patterns, changes in vegetation, population density, the canopy cover, and how that helps to inform decisions and understanding of our environment. And the bird numbers and variety are a really good indicator of biodiversity health. And we're obviously, from what I've heard of the Walleye Creek, there are a lot more variety of birds there, but I'm surprised at the variety that we see. Jennifer and Doug will touch on those numbers later in the presentation. Okay, next one, Jamie. As I said, the observation of the birds gives us information, and we had a tremendous experience a couple of months ago now. There were a huge flock of little cormorants that came in about 5 or 6 groups of 20 or 30, and they seemed to be supporting each other into the water. Another group would fly over the top of them and go into the water, and another group, and it was obviously the river was full of small mullet. It was just after the mullet may have hatched or whatever they do, spawned, so the birds are telling us that there's lots and lots of life in the river, lots of things that they're feeding on. Next one, Jamie. Similarly with the spoonbill, see them wading along the side. They're eating smaller crustaceans and other smaller microbic feed. But the fact that they're there and they're feeding healthily tells us that there's life in the river. So there's information coming through those observations and those recordings. Okay, next.
Oh.
Yeah, that's me. I'll pass over now to Jennifer, who will talk about some of the processes we use for bird identification. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Peter. I just want to say at the outset that I'm no expert, but we do have amongst the Mudlarks, or people that regularly come to the Mudlarks, some very capable people like Chris Mabry, but also David Hare. Now, David Hare is a university lecturer, and he does field studies, training students on how to recognise birds. So, and we've got all the experience of people that have lived along the river, and that helps us really learn how to do it. So the 4 main habitats, of course, we've got the river, we've got some wetlands with the Cup and Saucer Creek and the Dibble Avenue waterhole. We've got plenty of trees, we've got open grasslands, and we've got only a few instances of dense bush, but all these different types of habitat will determine type of bird. But it's not just the habitat along the river. Peter mentioned about the little fairy wrens, superb fairy wrens. They are at Ford Avenue, and they are supported not only by the thick vegetation at Ford Avenue in that bush care site, but because the adjoining houses have thick shrubbery as well. So it's kind of the combination of providing enough habitat so those little birds will not feel as threatened. Could I have the next? Now, this is a fabulous photo of the darter. Now, we haven't seen many of these along the river. They are quite a large bird, as you can see, but that again tells you that we can get a range of aquatic birds, and often these birds do have to dry their wings out. So this is one of their things. And one would expect to only see these aquatic birds on the river or near the river, but I have seen them quite high up in the mangroves. So although we have this expectation of where we're going to find birds, sometimes they surprise us. Okay, could I have the next? Now, firstly, if we're lucky, we can actually see the bird, and we can quickly, by their shape or where they are, think about what bird they are. Now, of course, raptors prefer high up positions, and we have seen them on top of aerials and stuff like that, which is great because they can see if there's any prey around. Now, with the parrots and ducks, parrots are obviously tree, ducks aquatic, and the cormorants, there's quite a range of cormorants, and there's quite a range of egrets, which can cause a lot of discussion about actually identifying which particular one. It's all a matter of looking at their colour of their beaks or their feet. So, and this is a form of a parrot. It's the eastern rosella, and we were so fortunate that the last one, the October survey, we saw a whole flurry of these. Now, it was on a particular part of the walk we were doing in Bayman Park, and it was away from the road, Wardell Road, and all the fuss. It was more inland, a bit more away from the river, so away from where people would be. And we saw about 5 or 6 eastern rosellas flying around, and that's the first time we had seen that. So that was really a fantastic experience, and everyone was excited. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is quite a usual thing in terms of the noisy miner annoying another bird. I mean, how many times have we seen this? And this, I believe, is a cattle egret. And this was great. This caused a great discussion about actually what kind of egret it was. There was a real big discussion. We didn't have it on as a cattle egret, but I remember Chris Mabry cycling back. He had to leave early, but he was mulling over this, and he came back to where we were having morning tea. It's definitely cattle egret, he said. So there's often a big discussion about what type of bird we have seen. But that's a fantastic shot of the noisy miner in full flight. Could we have the next slide, please? This is again a beautiful shot of the eastern spoonbill, and again you would expect them to see, and that's one of the surest birds to identify, because just the action of their feeding and the way they use their spoonbill. But and often they are more likely to be seen at low tide. But they're all magnificent. But we don't see them every time we go out, but they're there in a fairly intermittent way. Could we have the next slide, please? Now, often, and this is where the experience of those that have had years and years of bird watching comes into play. Listening to bird calls can indicate a bird's location before sighted. We all know the beautiful sound of the butcher bird, and it leads you to where it is. Now, we have some very distinctive bird calls, the red wattle bird, the willy wagtail, and when it gets going, we could be walking along one side of the river river. And we can hear Willy Wagtail from across the river. For a small bird, they make a loud call. The superb fairy wren have a beautiful, delicate tweet, and I've already mentioned the greying butcher bird. This is where David here is superb, because he can really identify those fine distinctions between different birds. In thick bushy areas, it may be only possible to identify birds by their calls, such as the olive-backed oriole. And that's especially around the Ford Avenue bush care site. Often we hear the bird before we see it, and then we go in. Now, this was not near Ford Avenue but this is a very good example of an olive-backed oriole. Okay, chirping away. It's quite a pretty bird. But we don't always get good shots like that, believe me. We often see a fleeting glimpse supported by what we have heard. Okay. Now, birds flying overhead can be recognised by their shape, flying pattern and call. And if you want to distinguish between a flock of corellas or sulphur-crested cockatoos, one, they make a different noise, but also the corellas tend to continually flap, whereas sulphur-crested cockatoos can glide. They tend to glide between. And also you can tell the rather reptilian profile of the Australian ibis as it flies. But there's some that you can, and also the welcome swallow. If you ever walk through the grassland along the Cooks River and you have these beautiful navy blue tinged wings flying around you with the welcome swallow, they're really quite, you know, beautiful close up. Now, we didn't have a photo of the Australian ibis, but we do have one of this beautiful, another great shot from David, of the striated heron. And it's really, you can see where, you know, how aeroplanes were designed based on birds' flight. When you look at that, that's a magnificent shot. And again, and I think this is a very good shot. Again, you think of a striated heron mainly you look down on the water's edge or when they feed, but, you know, these birds do fly to different areas to get better food. So it's just good to be aware of what's happening above you just as well as on the ground. Okay. Yeah. Now, social behaviour. Now, we all know about the rainbow lorikeets. We always can hear them quite a long way before we see them. And the sulphur-crested cockatoos tend to encourage in flocks. And there was that brilliant photo right at the beginning of the presentation that showed them all in that tree. Well, the poor old spoonbill seems to be quite solitary, you know, and I've never seen, even with its, I've only seen them on their own. And it's interesting, with the welcome swallows, you often see them flying in groups, where other birds tend to be more solitary kind of individuals. Now, we know that the tawny frogmouths are nocturnal, and we are very fortunate along the Cooks River that we have 2 sites where we can see them. Not yet, please, can we go back? Because we see them, there's a site near the boat harbour, but there's also another site across the other side of the river. And we're very lucky because I belong to the Greenway Birdos, and we do not have the same consistency of the numbers. And they're far more exposed to danger in the suburban areas when compared to that along the river. Can we have the next slide now, please? Now, here's the sulphur-crested cockatoo. They're quite social. This is a solitary one, and but they're quite interesting, and they're very intelligent birds, as we know. And it's quite interesting. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, we are going through spring at the moment, and it's been really dramatic along the river, and it's quite interesting. Bird numbers increase, nesting behaviours vary. Some birds become very aggressive and can, you know, tend to swoop at you. And when I was talking about the sulphur-crested cockatoos and parrots, they tend to want to nest in tree hollows. And as we know, there aren't that many older trees that have tree hollows, but there is one that scores 2 hollows. And we were walking past and there was a great battle for the real estate between rainbow lorikeets and sulphur-crested cockatoos. But I think the sulphur-crested cockatoos used their size and won the day. Okay, so tree hollows do become prime real estate. Please, to the next slide, thanks. This is some of the nesting behaviour, and these are illustrate the great photography of David Noble. This is a mudlark, and these are nesting in, what do you call, sorry, I've just got a, yeah, but the tree, they're in mangroves, that's right.
Mangroves.
Yeah, they're nesting in mangroves, and beautifully formed nest. And this is a lovely photo where you have the 2 chicks being fed. Could we have the next slide, please? And this is of a willy wagtail with a perfectly formed nest. Really lovely, again on the mangroves. So we're seeing these birds that might nest elsewhere, but using the cover of the mangrove to make a safe nesting space. And the next slide, please. And the lovely tawny frogmouth sitting on a nest, not nearly, it's a bit untidy compared to the willy wagtail and the mudlarks, but it kind of fits in because it kind of, that nest kind of blends in with the tree. And as you know, the tawny frogmouth is so well camouflaged, so it kind of adds. But to have a photo of a tawny sitting on a nest, I was telling that to my Greenway Birdo friends, and they were very jealous. So very rare, very rare. So could we have the next slide, please? And this is where we saw, I put this in because this was really unreal. There's flocks of birds flying in from the south, feeding on the mallet, and then the seagulls were along the side picking up the scraps. And it was, but it became wave after wave, and it was about there for about a week because one of my neighbours said he saw the same thing. And it was really interesting. We first noticed the mullet because Peter said in the canal that's near Cup and Saucer Creek, he said, oh, these are all fingerlings. And we all looked over and we saw the massive of these little fingerlings flowing out to the river. And then the next minute we saw this wave after wave of cormorants landing. So it was very interesting. We have seen cormorants from the old Langro Bridge working on a line, feeding. They are really quite a, they really work well as a collective group. Next slide, please. And these are the said people. Unfortunately, there's no photo of David Hare here, but there's David Noble on the left, Chris Maybury, myself, Peter and John, and the person that's behind where we can see each other is Joe Blackman, who's the organiser of the Greenway Birdos. Now, with that folder, that list of birds that we used was an amalgamation of about 3 bird lists. I went through the Tempe bird lists and also amalgamated with the Greenway Birdos. And it was refined after a couple of goes to make sure that we had the most expected birds on that list. So with everything, it takes some refinement until we can get it right. Next photo, please. One time, this is where we're so lucky to have David here. We went to the Dibble water hole, and suddenly David said, this is fantastic. And he looked across, and from where we stood in that playground, across the water hole into the surrounding trees and everything on the other side, David saw a Nankeen heron. Now, Simon, who's one of our keenest bird watchers, indicated to me later that she has seen a Nanking heron closer to Canterbury, but it was very hard to see, and it took a while for everyone to have a look, but that was a fantastic photo. They're a night heron, so we're very lucky to see it. Anyway, next shot, please. Now, some of the references that we have used, we haven't necessarily used this one, but I had just gave it out on the last one in October, a photo guide to the birds along of the Greenway. There is a different range of birds, smaller birds, but Jo Blackman was able to get a Commonwealth Environment grant where she had all these pamphlets. She produced it with David Hare and Chris King and David Noble, produced this pamphlet and also gave away 3 native plants so we could establish better habitat for small birds. The one that everyone received, can we have the next slide please, is a photo guide to the birds of Western Sydney. Whenever new people turn up, they do get I bought a whole lot some time ago, this photo guide. It tends to have more of the birds that we see along the river, and it's light and it gives you a start, okay? There are apps. I've got Birds of Australia app on my phone, but you need to know what you're looking at to look it up, which is a bit frustrating. Can we have the next shot, please? What some time ago, I bought this photographic field guide, Birds of Australia, and this is the Bible that we consult if there's any great discussion about what bird it is. And so we look up that, because as I said, sometimes you only get a fleeting glance. Sometimes you only hear it for a couple of seconds. So it's often a kind of joint decision about what bird it is. Okay, next question, next thing. Now, there are a couple of good links that you can get. Now, it's great, this timing of the hatching, this presentation is really good because it's we've got BirdLife Australia having their Aussie backyard bird count. It's a free app that you can download. It only takes 20 minutes and gives you a great guide to birds, right? There's also what bird song is that? Now, I've checked on that link and there's the top 40 bird songs that go for about 20 seconds, and you can get a really good feel for that. There's also, what I haven't included, if you are on Facebook, there's a whole lot of range of bird groups. There's bird group based on magpies. There's a bird group Aussie birds, backyard birds, and you see a whole range of birds from across Australia. Really good, clear photos, wonderful photos. So if just to have a look at what kind of birds there are around in Australia. And so what happens? Okay, we record these bird numbers on the sheet, right? On 2 sheets. I either scan or photo them and send them off to Doug, who then collates the data, and it's over to you, Doug, to explain your wonderful tables and graphs.
Okay, well, I'm just going to talk about the way we collect the data. It's sort of a group effort. One person has the data sheet, and then we count all of the birds we see and identify them. So someone will call out, 1 mudlark, and someone else will call out parrots, 2 parrots, and we collect the data that way. On a typical, over the 18 months that we've been recording, we've recorded nearly 60 species at 2 sites. You can see Boat Harbour and Wave Rock there. I've divided for the analysis, I divide them up into water birds, woodland birds, and open area birds. And from the table there, you can see there's about a third of the birds are water birds, a third are woodland birds, and a third are open area birds. And the numbers are somewhat similar at the two sites. There's, yeah, actually surprisingly interesting. They're similar sorts of numbers at the two sites. On a visit on the right-hand side there, in the 2-hour period, we might record something like 25 to 40 species, depending on the season. Again, similar numbers at each site, a few more at Boat Harbour because there are more water birds there because of the Couple Creek wetlands included in that area. And we end up counting something like 200 to almost 300 birds per 2 hours. So, which is about 2 birds per minute. So we've got lots of things to do. It doesn't quite end up being exactly 2 birds a minute. You'll have a few minutes and there won't be anything, and then a flock of birds will come over and we'll count and record them. So if you are worried that you wouldn't be able to help identify birds and so on because you're not experienced, you're just interested in learning, it's, as I say, it's a group effort. People call out birds, other people confirm, yes, that's a such and such. So it really is a group effort. And if you don't know, you just, you don't have to say anything. So we're collecting quite a nice lot of data from a group of people that range from real experts through to people that are just interested in being there. And we're happy to have any of those sorts of people along because it's it really is an interesting group interaction with nature, shall we say.
Yeah,
okay, next slide. Now, I've tried to put a few graphs here to try and show that how we can use the data. This is a graph of the number of species each visit since March 2019. And I've divided up into 3 lines there. The green lines are the open area birds. So that's the swallows and the ravens and so on. The red lines are the, what are they? They're the
woodland
birds. And the blue lines are the water birds. And you can see there's an interesting increase in woodland and open area birds round about November. So we're actually confirming. Now, you probably know this, there are more birds in spring, but it's nice to have a graph and information showing that. And of course, we're only up to 18 months here, and there's some gaps in that graph actually because of COVID. We didn't do mornings then. But I think that as we go along and we perhaps get up to 2, 3, 4 years of data, there'll be some nice patterns in those numbers. Next. So looking, I mentioned that there were, well, first of all, I should say, some birds we see regularly. Every time we'll more or less see those birds. So they're residents of the valley. The other group of birds are the ones that just turn up at particular times. And they're the ones that generally make up the spring increase in birds. So here we've got the woodland birds, and you can see a list of birds there that essentially they're spring summer visitors. In the graph there, you can see this is actually the data for Boat Harbour. So you'll remember we alternate between Boat Harbour and Wave Rock. So if I added in by Wave Rock, the graph there from September through to January would be denser. It's just that those figures aren't in it. It's only got the Boat Harbour one. But you can see definite concentration of these birds in spring. So if you want to see more birds, you come along to our spring meetings. Next. All right. As I said, these are just a few graphs that I put together. I'm not a bird person. I'm a plant person. So I can't really explain everything in these, but I think what has surprised me is you would think that just a group of people going out for 2 hours once a month, that the variation between visits would be very great. But in fact, the results over our period are really quite consistent for some birds, and there are patterns for others. It's quite surprised me how this rather broad way of recording actually comes up with quite nice data. So here we have ibis at all the sites. And this one is just demonstrated, if you remember, if we go back to 2019, at the end of 2019, it was very dry. And you see on the left-hand side, fewer birds there, it's dry. And as we're going through to the last date there, September 2020, a lot more birds associated with the wet conditions. So obviously, people know more wet, more water, more birds. But again, it's just nice to see how we can graph it out and say convincingly, yes, look, the ibis have increased. Next. This is the two types of cormorants, the little black cormorants in blue and the little pieds in orange. So we've got the dates across the bottom and the number of cormorants on the left. You'll see that the orange, the little pied cormorants, we get a few on each occasion. So it's around about something like 2 to 5 birds we see pretty well through the whole period there. So there are, in other words, there are small numbers relatively consistently along the river.
Excuse me, Doug, with that May the 20th, that was the time when the mullet was running and we were guessing that number.
Well, I was about to say, yes, so exactly. There was a whole lot.
There were so many, you know.
Yes, I guess. Well, what you mean you were guessing it was 60?
Yes, there could have been more.
Yes. Well, the real point is that generally for the little black cormorants we found something between a number between say 10 and 20 along our kilometre section of the river, and on that occasion we had to make a guesstimate, but 60 was a reasonable figure. You might say, okay, that's 60 plus or minus 10 or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can clearly see there was a real increase that time. And in fact, this data, I think, gives you some idea of the total population of cormorants along the river. Because if we say, okay, there's about 10 along the river each time we go, and that's 10 along a 1 kilometre stretch, say. If there's going to be 60, they're probably the 10 from 6 kilometres, which more or less takes us down to Marrickville and down to Tempe. So in a sense, our flock of 60 birds was probably the whole population of those cormorants from the river at that time. So as I'm not an expert on cormorants, that's my reading from the graph, and other people might be able to comment on that. But it's interesting that with our figures, our sampling, we can actually make estimates of what the numbers of birds for the whole river may be in some cases. Next. This is one with 2 birds in it. We've got our 2 swamp birds, purple swamp hen and dusky moorhen. And these birds are most conspicuous up at Cup and Saucer Creek wetland. They breed up there. We've seen adults with young, so we know that they're resident in that area. On the purple swamp hen on the left, you'll see the blue lines are the records from the Boat Harbour days, and you can see, okay, there's about 10 birds we see each time on our Boat Harbour walk. And you can see one little orange mark there, which is from the Wave Rock Day, which is a kilometre further away. And you can see we've recorded one record. So the purple swamp hen is essentially confined to the Cup and Saucer Creek. It doesn't get very far. The dusky moorhen, on the other hand, which again is a similar sort of bird, a bit smaller, you can see blue again for the Cup and Saucer Creek Boat Harbour records. But this time we've got small, the dusky moorhen is much more common than the purple swamp hen. You can see more or less 10 maximum for the swamp hens, but we're up to 25 for the dusky moorhen. So interesting, we've got figures from this on how the relative size of the population. But you can see the dusky moorhens, we recorded them in small numbers on the Boat Harbour section in orange. So the dusky moorhens are actually happy up there in Cuppenstocks Creek, but they're getting out. They're spreading down the river, much more so than the purple swamp hens, which means if we were trying to create habitat further down the river, doing something, trying to improve conditions, local conditions for water birds there, they're probably likely to colonise those sites fairly quickly because they're moving around. Next. Oh, okay. Well, that's all I've got. But essentially, as I said, we've seen about 60 different species, and we could actually look at graphs for a lot of them and find quite interesting characteristics. I'll now pass back to Peter.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, it's interesting trying to analyse make sense of that data. The joy of seeing the birds and sharing the company of the people watching them. On this photo on screen, you can see we had visibility problems in the fog and things, but still lots of bird activities at that time, and the hearing of the birds becomes even more important then. Interesting, can't see any binoculars there, but everyone's got a pair of binoculars, and everyone, when someone points and looks, everyone scans with their binoculars, and it's terrific to see, particularly rare birds, so birds you don't see very often, or birds with a beautiful song.
Can I just...
As both Jen and Doug have said, would certainly encourage anyone who wants to have an enjoyable couple of hours to come along. The company's good. Everyone is happy to share their knowledge. I've learned a tremendous amount just by listening and watching. And the morning tea that follows is always lots of chocolate monties and other sweets, but also good conversation for another hour or so after the observation. So I'd like to thank all those. I think I said earlier on, we're averaging about 11 people. The last group we did, we had, I think, 15 or 16 people.
Excuse me, Peter, we had 18.
All right, yeah.
We had 18. I'm not trying to correct you on that, but there's one person that I think hasn't been mentioned, and that's Chris Maybury. And he's... Chris. Yeah, but in terms of, he's also putting data on eBird. So we're getting Doug's great work on tabulating all the graphs, but Chris is also putting data on eBird, which is really good, because, and we're thinking of whether we would go to the Atlas or whatever, but we are trying to spread, we're trying to use the data as effectively as we can. I'm sorry for the interruption, Peter.
Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. We're going to attempt to have questions. If Anne will moderate that process. Anne, do you want to give an instruction for that?
Yes, thanks everyone. That was a wonderful presentation. Absolutely fascinating and beautiful photographs. It was really magnificent to get that education on the birds of the Cooks River. So I'm going to ask, because we've got 45 people in the session, if you have a question, can you please just pop something into the chat and then unmute yourself so that you can ask the question. Is there anyone who is wanting to ask a question straight up? You can put your hand in the air or type something. Okay, so Dorothy Luther has got a question. So Dorothy, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
That was a very interesting talk. I'd just like to say that, I mean, Wallow Creek have been doing surveys for years and years, and we've been looking at ways to do some more scientific analyses of the data. I've discovered that Macquarie University has a statistics course. And
sorry, Dorothy, can I ask you to lean a bit closer to your microphone or speak a bit more loudly, because it's a bit difficult to hear you.
Oh, it was way over there, yeah. So yeah, I was saying that we're looking at ways to analyse our, you know, I think we've got something like 50,000 records now. The Macquarie University runs a statistics course, and they look for live databases, real databases that their students can practice on for a final year undergraduate subject. Now, this was the first term that I used this service this year, and we had a very interesting time looking through our data and looking at gross sort of changes over time. But I'd just like to put out there that the service is there. I'd be very interested to talk to Doug and some of the other people probably offline about you know, sharing everybody's data on the Cooks River Alliance and what kind of questions people would really like asked, because we've got data, and Doug's obviously been looking at a number of sorts of questions that I hadn't even thought of. That you know, maybe we could investigate. So I just wanted to let everyone know that's there. I've spoken to Peter Munro briefly about it, but obviously I need to speak to Doug Benson about it. So just be interested in hearing Doug's comments. Thanks.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Yes. Yeah.
I just say that if you're interested in looking at data, start with small bodies of data first, and look for questions that you're interested in. It's a bit frightening to be told, okay, well, here's 30 years of data for 150 bird species. You know, tell me all about it. You're better off with a question like, where do I find red-browed finches along the river, and how, what sort of seasonality and or how could I improve the habitat for them? And so actually work with specific birds, I suspect.
Yeah. Okay, we're probably coming from different directions, because the students, they're statistics students, so they're looking at sort of they're wanting a reasonably large amount of data to work on. That's my understanding. Anyway, just thought I'd ask the question.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, have you got a question? Excuse me.
Yes, I want to ask a really much lowbrow question, please. Darters and cormorants, I think I thought they were the same bird. Can someone tell me, is a darter a cormorant? Are they a different species, please?
Quite frankly, I don't know, but the darter has a different kind of beak. It's quite a pointy kind of yellow beak. There is quite a distinctive. It's a very big bird. It's a bit bigger than the large cormorant, but I honestly do not know.
Yeah, the data's much bigger and spears its prey. It uses its beak to spear its prey.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Whereas the cormorant swallows the fish whole.
Swallow. I would imagine or would assume that it's a different species, but I'm no expert on that. So Julie, I could get back to you and check it out. If you...
Yeah.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good. Thanks.
Can I just say, Julie, just from my casual observation, the darters have very triangular shaped wings. Sorry, I've got a...
Yeah, I'll have to be...
And they swim underwater, and they look like a snake in the water because they've got this long angular neck, and they just stick the tip of their beak out. They're quite amazing looking birds.
I did see one of those big groups. I didn't see what obviously the mudlarks saw, but I did see a whole group of those cormorants moving down the river one day, and I thought that was pretty impressive. Yeah. All right, I'll have to be a bit more observant.
Okay. Any more questions? Gareth, is that just a comment or a question?
I think Gareth's asking the same question.
Yeah, I'm muting myself. Sorry, it took me a second there. But yeah, look, it would be great to see the whole list. I mean, I've seen a few birds up and down the river. Occasionally, you kind of feel like when you see something a bit exotic, you feel like you want to tell somebody, it's an exciting thing. I appreciate it. It often occurs outside of, the 2 hour once a month time frame. But for instance, I mean, I've spotted things like a common rake at Cup and Saucer Creek, or we've had a rufous fan tower pass through our backyard. Both, you know, things that if you know they're in the neighbourhood, I mean, we're a street back from the river. If you know they're about, there might be something to, you know, look out for in the right season along the river. So it was just interesting having a look at the full list of what you've seen, because for sure there'll be stuff that I haven't seen and others haven't seen, which may be of interest.
Well, I haven't seen either of those two birds you mentioned. Can I make a suggestion? Please take your mobile phone with you or a camera when you go on these works.
Yeah, no, I haven't done that, no.
Because it's really good. It's very hard when you only see a bird for a number of seconds, but if you could take a shot and then come back and have a look and look it up, and that does really help with the IDing of it. Simon, one of our keen mudlarks, is very avid bird taking photos of birds with her mobile. I mean, it's a simple machine, and she has been able to see quite a lot. So you don't have to have a complicated 4x zoom like David might have, but that helps with it. And I don't mind if, you know, David here wouldn't mind, because he's very experienced, if you could funnel some of those queries to me and I could ask him, rather than one in a batch rather than a dribble. He might be able to help us there as well. Okay.
Cheers.
There's a quick question here from Robin McMahon about some birds soaring high on the thermals. Do you want to ask that, Robin?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, just as I said, I'm down the Canterbury end, and I've noticed over the last few weeks I've seen them, and I've just tried to ask Dr. Google what they might be, and just wondered if anybody had any ideas here.
So we're talking about some very big birds soaring really high on the thermals above the Canterbury area of the river. Would they be pelicans?
That's just what I'm wondering. Yeah, not sure.
All right.
Could be raptors.
It could be raptors higher.
Ah, yes.
Wow, that'd be great.
Yeah, the peregrine falcons have just fledged out at the bay. So there are lots of, we've seen the odd one at along the river, but that sounds like their behaviour. The pelican as well, that does soar very high on the breeze, on the updrafts.
You couldn't tell us what colour. You know, a large.
Oh, they were so high. They were so high. Yeah.
So they must be reasonably big.
Yeah.
To be that high. I mean, seeing birds using thermals is fascinating. You know, it's one of nature's wonders. So keep a lookout and see if you can get a better description so we can help you there.
Was it just a single bird?
Two,
right.
Yeah.
The ravens also soar very high.
Yeah, soar very high. And currawongs do.
Yeah, Barney's just saying that pelicans are usually in pairs, and we've watched them here at the boat harbour, circling very high. They look like they're as high as almost as high as a plane.
Yeah.
So very high up, and they do these enormous circles. But then they come down and the circles get a bit smaller, and eventually they land like Catalinas. They land like Catalinas on the river here at the boat harbour.
Well, it was that area, so yeah, maybe that's what they were.
Yeah, they're very
wonderful. Thank you.
There's a quick note here from Kate about the welcome swallow, and then after that a little question from Martin.
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, hi, sorry, this is the first time I've been in Zoom, and I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't have a picture, sorry, but it's just, I live in South Marrickville, and I go to the Woolworths there, and there's a tunnel that you walk through to go home again, sort of next to their car park, and there's a swallow's nest on top of the light in there, and I've lived here for about 14 years. And Woolies cleaned the nest away one year, but it seems to have been rebuilt. And I was just wondering if I see the swallows flying away from it, but I'm wondering if they're welcome swallows or they might be something else. another type of swallow, perhaps.
What colour are they?
They're really dark. They're so fast that I can't tell. They just fly away when I go in there. I'm sorry, I haven't got a better idea.
Well, they do sound like a welcome swallow.
It's a circular nest made of pieces of brown mud.
Yeah, yeah. And are they can they fly fairly low to the ground? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay.
when they fly off, they have to swoop underneath the walkway up to the Woolworths, so they have to go pretty low.
Yeah.
It's sad that they're often vandalised as well. There used to be a lot of them out on the near Barton Park under the bridge there, and they just used to get vandalised every year. There were rows and rows of them that people would just go and smash them down.
Yeah,
I was very sad.
I was wondering if it's possible to establish a habitat for them at a house. Like, how would you do that? Maybe.
Yeah. But they seem to prefer that location underneath something that's completely away from predators, but humans are very adaptive in their predation.
I see. Well, thank you.
Okay.
I'll keep an eye on it anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin has got a comment about his Facebook page.
Oh, thanks, Anne. Yeah, it just made me think of it when Gareth said he wishes there was some place he could, tell someone about some interesting sightings he may have had. Well, I've got the answer. For those who use Facebook, I run a page called Cooks River Wildlife, and it's mostly me posting, my preferred medium is video. It's mostly me posting videos of interesting animals, not just birds, but tends to be mainly birds around the Cooks River Valley. But I really encourage anyone to post their own images. It's free for anyone to do that if they see something interesting or they don't know what it is. Just join the group and post it, and someone else can ID it or comment on it, and it gives a lot of people pleasure to know what's going on around them.
Thanks, Martin. That sounds like a wonderful idea. What's it called, though, again, to make sure I've got it in my head right?
Cooks River Wildlife. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you got the echidna there?
Yeah, there's someone who's posted that. That was amazing, wasn't it? That just went nuts on Facebook, wherever that got posted, including on this page.
Okay, well, I think that's about the end of the questions. There's just a little comment from Laura Zuthers about that the birds flying high up could be ibis or goshawks. Did you want to say anything more about that, Laura, or you're not? It was just a comment. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been an absolutely fascinating and informative session. I'm just going to stop recording now, and within a few days, I'll try and upload that to our Facebook pages and so on, so that people can watch it again later. But thanks so much to all the presenters from the Mudlarks, Peter, Jennifer, Doug, and the wonderful work of James.
Jamie, yes.
Jamie,
yes.
who did all the fantastic visual slideshow presentation in a very short period of time. And of course, the magnificent photographs that are part of that presentation from David Noble. So I'll thank everybody. I'm going to stop recording now. And are there any final comments before we finish up for the night?
Thanks, Jamie, again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes. I really would like to thank Jamie because he has been busy working on his new house, and to do that after a hard day's labouring would have been quite an effort. So I really appreciate, and his patience with me when I had my new computer and I didn't know what I was doing. So I really appreciate his support.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been a really
Thank
fantastic,
you.
fabulous session.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
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 Bye.